good. All right, good. We should be live now. We'll call to order this regular meeting of the Easton Reading Region 9 Joint Boards of Education Policy Committee at 9:16 a.m. Sorry for the delayed start. We're just working to get quorum and got everybody here. Well, not everybody. Gwen is not able to make it this morning. So members in attendance, Chris Parkin, John Stinson, Maureen Williams, as well as our administrators, Dr. McKinnon and Dr. Pearson Ugal. This meeting is being live streamed. I got it. We'll start with public comment. No members of the public being present. We'll go to committee member comment. If no one else has anything, well, even if others have something, I know we have a spot at the end for committee member comment, but sometimes we run against time. So I want to take a moment to just recognize the incredible contribution of our colleague Maureen Williams, to say thank you for all of the hard work. Thank you all for not billing us. For all of the
now that's good. That's good advice there.
for all the advice, because there's no way we could have afforded the unbelievable amount of energy and effort and hours that you put into the important work of the policy committee. If I go back and do a recap of the policies that we updated, enhanced, and ultimately passed, it's a very impressive collection of policies. And I would argue that it's some of the most important work that these boards have done over the course of the last many years. And it's thanks in large part to your contributions. And I will be very sad to see you to go, not be a part of our Friday morning conversations each week. And you will be very much missed. So
thank you. Maybe I'll just sign in just to be the public member, and I can offer public comment, and you all can, take it for what it's worth.
That would be wonderful. But thank you.
So I guess if we're doing this now,
the whole meeting is not about this, guys. Move on.
Well, so I will incorporate by reference my comments from Tuesday night's Region 9 meeting and ask that be reflected in the minutes. And just to thank Maureen for making all of us better through our collaboration in this work over the past years.
Hear, hear.
Thanks, guys.
All right. If there's no additional committee member comment, we'll move on to discussion and possible action. The first item, and so just a quick shout out as we usually do, is there anything from the administrative side that we're going to want to save time for today?
Nothing that is urgent.
Okay. All right. Very good. Then what we have as our first item, and I suspect this is where we'll spend the majority of our time, is a sort of look at the sort of progress we've made to date and then the sort of work ahead for 2022. And I think it's particularly valuable to have Maureen's input on as a sort of exit interview of, how do we think we're doing in terms of making progress against our ultimate goals. I'll bring up in a moment the sort of documents that we've used to, try to organize our thoughts and sort of thinking about the overall arc of our progress. I would argue that we should be open in this discussion to really sort of putting anything on the table. It has been raised in the past, whether from board members or from administration, the idea of, you can just buy a sort of whole set of policies. That has not been the way that we've been sort of heading, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't discuss the merits of that and sort of have an idea of whether or not that's something we want to entertain in 2022. I think we start though with, what have we been doing and where are we going and how have we been, how have we been making progress and, any lessons learned if we were going to continue on the path we're on, what exactly, should we be doing to be as efficient as possible? Does that make sense?
On the topic of buying stuff wholesale, I think that leads to one of two outcomes. One is it gets put on a shelf and collects dust and is never really in keeping with the spirit or manner in which the three districts operate and creates the potential for a mismatch and a conflict. The second is we buy something off the shelf and then have to work through it to customize it to make sure that it is reflective of our operations. And I think that through our CABE membership, that's effectively what we've done anyway. And we have taken their off-the-shelf policies and worked through them to simplify them and conform them to what we think is best practice for our unique little fiefdom.
I don't think you off-source this at all. I think that this is the basic work of deciding how a policy is implemented in a district and what the district policy is, and you don't off-source this.
I agree with that sentiment. And I think for the reasons, I'm doing this on purpose, by the way, if anyone wanted to
make the comment that it needs to be bigger.
Oh, there we go. Had to have one more of those. Jason, you weren't a part of many of those meetings where I'd be 10 minutes in and the font would be tiny, and someone would politely say, "Hey, is there any way we could get that zoomed in a little?" All right. So yeah, and I don't want to sort of completely close the door on that conversation. I want us to be open to sort of other advice, but I agree with that assessment. And
Can I make a comment?
Please.
Do you mind if I make a comment here?
Please.
So we went through this in my previous district, where we looked at multiple options, CABE, Shipman, and policies from Pullman and Comley. And we met with Shipman and went out to RFP and so on. I think I've mentioned this to you before.
Yep.
And I this is certainly your prerogative, and I understand, you've just stated kind of that you like to have policies personalized to ER9, correct? And I think that because ER9 is so different in the way that it operates with 3 boards and the 2 towns, then I think there's something to be said to keep some of these policies personal, because the way in which you operate within the 2 towns and the 3 boards, it needs to be personal. So I understand.
Well, I actually wouldn't make that particular argument. I don't think it's as much about personalizing it in my mind, because ultimately we are talking about 3 separate policies that we want to be harmonized. But it is the Easton board is approving this, and we hope that through the recommendation of our joint policy committee, we're seeing the Reading board adopt the same policies and the Region 9 board adopt the same policies. But from my point of view, it is less about the sort of personalized version and more about the active engagement of the
governance
board.
In a form.
Exactly. Of the board and of to some degree the public in the conversation about the policy. Even if we are looking at CABE model policy and we don't make any adjustments to it, or we're looking at something from Shipman, or we're looking at something from another attorney, the process of reviewing it, the process of thinking critically about whether or not it's in keeping with our sort of our principles, our core principles, and sort of what we're here to do, and the way that we will seek to be compliant with law. I think that process is really healthy for us and a kind of an important element of the work of being a board. But interested in is there a way to sort of satisfy that sort of really digging into it. What I worry about is sort of becoming the rubber stamp and letting the muscle of sort of critical review atrophy.
Well, I think you can continue with that oversight and governance and still be up to date in policies that are, for the most part, just required legal legislative standards.
Right.
And so what I meant to say before about when I talked about the 2 towns and the 3 boards is that there are differences that Shipman or CABE cannot capture. For
Mhm.
example, you have a Parks and Rec policy on how a building is utilized,
Mhm.
and that you have to personalize because you've got different infrastructure that shipment or cable cannot possibly capture. You may make a decision as a board that there's a certain amount of a certain threshold where you require 3 quotes on going out to bid, or
Yep.
whether you require when you
To-
require an RFP, and where
to-
you set those limits.
Right. To
I think they're
reflect the
personal.
fiduciary, sort of expectations of the town.
Right. And so
Yep.
those types of decisions require study, research, and
Mhm.
agreement within the 3 boards.
Yep.
There's a certain amount of policy that is just, here's the legislation, here's the standard, that don't require any personalization.
Mhm.
And so if I can share my screen, I can kind of show you an example of what we did, and then of course you can. I just want to show you the work so you
Yeah, that's great.
understand, kind of what it could look like.
Yeah.
And then of course you can go forward.
Yeah,
But-
that's great. Maureen, did you have something you wanted to add as Jason?
All I was going to say, Dr. McKinnon, is as we've done this work, we've realized that in certain segments, we are, shall we say, ahead of the curve from what's legislatively required. And in some instances, wisely ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to lose the opportunity to continue to be ahead of the curve.
Yeah. I also stacking a little bit there is the I don't know, outside of CABE model policy, but our partners at CABE do a lot of work that we all benefit from immensely, but we find a lot of places where there's a need to clarify, correct, and sort of streamline the language sometimes that we get from CABE.
It's very polite.
I totally understand what you're saying, and I like the idea of being ahead of the curve. And it's simply the idea of what are the policies where you're ahead of the curve that you want to keep, and what are the policies that are 20 years old that need updating.
Yep.
And you could certainly take the policy manual that you have and identify and put it into buckets, right? Policies that we're ahead of the curve, we've recently adopted, we're keeping those policies. Policies that are standard, that every district has, that come straight from the legislature. Policies that are so far outdated that we need to do something to bring us up to compliance.
Yeah, I think, go ahead, sorry, I cut you off.
No, I just, well, let me just show you. And I just need permission to share screen.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I made you a co-host. That didn't work. I have to click the yes button. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. So what we did here was we looked at our policies that were 20 years old, and we sorted them into these buckets. Current policies that should be reviewed, policies proposed to be repealed, policies that should be moved for adoption, and a group of policies that have been done in the last 18 months that we're not going to make a decision on.
And can I ask how that work that you're describing, how did that happen? Like how long did that review take? Who was involved in that review?
The policy committee, the policy subcommittee.
Yeah.
The policy subcommittee kind of divided the work into, this is the really important work we've done recently, we're going to keep, that we've personalized. These are the policies that CABE and Shipman can't possibly provide us guidance on, because they're individual policies about how we use the buildings in our towns, right? And a group of policies that were just so far outdated, and so on. So,
and how long did that process take to actually review and categorize each of the policies in that way?
I think that probably, it didn't take that long because we weren't going through and identifying
just
changes
bucketing.
we were just
Right.
putting things into buckets.
Yeah, I really like that as a sort of as a project management process. I mean, like that is not inconsistent with what we're doing. I think it would enhance what we're doing.
I think we have sort of an added layer of problem, which is that, so we have some policies across all three boards from 1997.
Right.
But as I think we saw in, for example, the positive school climate policy, Easton and Reading were replacing one policy. Region 9 was replacing a different policy.
Right.
They had all been updated at different intervals over time because each of the three boards had taken a different level of interest in keeping on top of policies over time, which had created to a, diversion. And so if we're to split into appendix A, B, and C, there's sort of AR, AE, A9, BR, BE, B9,
Right.
and they're going to start creating a matrix that goes out into beyond. And so when we started this work over 2 years ago at this point, the decision was, instead of trying to take a mountain of policies this high that needed to be updated and work through them one by one, it was, let's accept the fact that this whole situation is a mess.
Yep.
And set as a goal the idea that all three boards should be able to adopt common policies. There's no real reason not to. And these sort of pretextual ideas that the Reading board doesn't have high school students, so we don't need policies that apply to high schoolers, and the high school board doesn't need to have policies relating to preschool, is just a roadblock to efficiency.
Mhm.
And so we committed to saying we're going to create policies that are a single policy. And instead of saying we're going to use the Reading policy book as a jumping off point, or the Region 9 policy, or we're going to try to align them because that would just be nightmare fuel. It was, let's pick a base. And we said, we're going to start with CABE, and we're going to assume that everything in the CABE core manual right now in 2019 is up to date through 2019. And we're going to work through all of them to make sure that they apply basic, keep it simple, stupid ideas. And once we get through that work, which we scheduled to finish before there was a whole global pandemic, then we would have a quarterly meeting where we would just review changes that need to be made going forward. That was sort of the plan. I'm totally okay with saying how do we prioritize within that?
Right.
But I'm also okay with saying we've gotten through series 1 through 3000 at this point in a sort of deliberate way.
Right.
Can we get through the other series in a deliberate way and get to a conclusion point where we can recommend an entire policy manual to all three boards, which then gives rise to a framework for future work and a sort of time for revisions.
Right. And sorry, Maureen. Yes.
No, I don't want to interrupt, but one of the other things we did, Dr. McKinnon, is we started with some guiding principles about what was aspirational, what was regulatory, and what was truly policy. And we parsed out things from the CABE manual that we thought were aspirational.
Right.
Our idea is this, we don't need that. We also parsed out regulations, and we subdivided things in terms of tasks that were specifically delegated.
Right.
So there is another running chart, which is not visible, I don't think, on what John had up. These are central office tasks.
Right.
Those components of the work, I think, are vital for central office.
Yeah.
I think those components of the work are also sort of a better organizational principle than CABE had.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I would be reluctant to lose that by sort of wholesale adopting this or that or the other, because I think we were on a better track.
Yeah, I think the second most valuable piece of this work will be that enumerated duties table that comes out of the policy manual that allows all 21 board members and all 16,000 constituents to say, here are the 742 things that we have requested the superintendent do on an annual basis. Yeah. Now tell me why he or she is not busy.
Yeah.
Chris, what you described when you said we're going to bring all of our outdated policies from the three different boards up to date in one time and get to a foundation.
Yep.
Did you do that? Or did you say you wanted to do that, but you didn't, but because of the pandemic, you stopped and you went?
We got about 60% of the way through. The pandemic put a hard stop on our work for several months. When we picked it back up, we got into refining the Title IX and school bullying policies because they were hot fires on the stove that needed to be resolved before we could get back to our core work.
And that was a part of the principles that we articulated. We articulated 6 principles as a part of the work. So 1, policies exist to carry out state and federal law and to communicate those laws to the broader community. 2, we're moving to CABE core policies as a way to create operational efficiencies for the tri-district boards and the respective administrations. 3, aspirational statements will exist outside of core policies. 4, all internal board governance will be carried out via each board's bylaws. 5, where an option between more complex, lengthy verbiage exists, the committee has opted for simplicity and brevity. And 6, policy committee members will engage in quarterly reviews. So this is once we complete the process, this review stage, that when we get into the sort of mature living stage, that we do quarterly reviews and make sure that this stuff stays current.
It's probably been about 9 months since we had a regular meeting where we work through chunks of the CABE policy, and we've been doing it 50, 60 pages a week, basically.
Right. And it's been a function of, we did do one in the last month or 2 where we actually did something like 40 pages of the 4,000 series. Maybe it's the 3,000, end of 3,000. But it's, we've just been going through the series, and then, that enumerated duties document, I agree with the sort of value of that. Anytime we're working through a policy, we just tag it. We say, oh, there's another thing where the superintendent or their designee, so that we have that, because we suspect it's going to be a fairly absurd list.
And I have sort of latent concerns, particularly if we wholesale adopt policies without understanding what's in them, that we're going to miss things that are required by law. And I'm making up a fiction here, that, on a quarterly basis, the superintendent must report to the financial authority of the town the current state of XYZ account.
Right.
And what I don't want is somebody playing gotcha with that on the backside, because we haven't been fully aware of what the obligations are.
Particularly in the current climate, I think you have to be avoidant of the gotcha availabilities.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I think the shipment policies are the gold standard in the state, in terms of these are everything that you are required to have. And that's why we ended up going with them. We looked at the CABE policies, and there was a lot of stuff that you didn't need to have. And there was a lot of conversations around policies that some board members wanted to keep because we've had them in the past. And Shipman coming in and saying, if you have a policy for that, you own it.
Right.
And you're actually responsible for something that you shouldn't be responsible for.
Right. You're giving yourself liability.
You now have oversight over something. And if you don't follow what the policy is, then you own it when it's broken.
Right.
And so that streamlined us to get us to kind of that base. Now, what Chris described that you wanted to do is kind of what we did. But it didn't mean that we threw out the policies that we wanted to make that were unique to our particular district. So anyway,
and I would just say that it's not a function of what we wanted to do. It's a function of what we are doing, because, we started the process, sort of articulated the core principles, started going through, and a part of that process, it wasn't in the core principles, but somewhere I've got it, the sort of process articulated for when urgent items come to our attention. So in comes the Title IX, that goes, oh, hit a pause on that, and here is a more urgent matter, right? In comes sort of the bullying update. Okay, that's going to displace, 3 weeks worth of meetings to progress. But now we're at the point where it doesn't look like we're getting new things, and it's okay, we're ready to dive back in, not to mention the 6-month break that we had for sort of pandemic related craziness.
I just found
it would probably be helpful for Dr. McKinnon to understand a little bit more concretely how much time we think it would take to get through the remaining work that we sort of attributed to ourselves or gave ourselves. And
Right.
I don't think it would take 6 more months. I mean, I
Yeah.
think
No.
with concerted effort, it would take a lot less than that.
Well,
And even if you doubled up your meetings a little bit,
and
you'd
we've
get
gotten
through the
the
remainder
media.
of it. And
Yeah,
so
I
then there
agree.
would be close to a finished product here.
Yep. Yep.
I think we're closer to the finish line, Dr. McKinnon, than maybe seems apparent.
Well,
Yeah.
is there any, all of our policies at the moment are based on CABE, is that correct?
That no, all the policies that we're working towards as a part of the sort of new revised are baseline CABE.
Like they
Okay.
historically
Yes.
probably were too.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Shipment.
CABE, but you can't. I have found items that did not come out of CABE, but
Okay, my suggestion then is if you're going to continue on this path, then look at shipment
mhm,
for your kind of exemplars,
mhm.
because they're just much better written.
The only
I
issue
mean-
there is what's the maintenance look like, right? With CABE, if we have a membership with CABE, then we have, as a part of the ongoing maintenance, we know where we're getting our source material from, because CABE publishes regularly the policy updates and tells, sort of says, hey, here's what's coming down the pipe, and then gives you the sample language. Whereas, and that's a part of our membership. Does Shipman offer that same thing? And I'm not making the argument for sunk cost, but being on the 4000 series means starting from the 1000 series again with the Shipman policies. And that only makes sense if it really, really makes sense.
Okay, so let me show you, let me just go to let me just stop sharing for a moment. And I'll share my entire desktop. So okay, so it's the same thing. You've got Shipman, who provides these.
So they have a subscription model too.
They've got a subscription model and a portal, and you click on a memo.
Mhm.
These are the
Okay.
suggested changes
Yep.
and
Do we know-
revisions.
Do we know what the cost of that is versus?
I
CABE
can
membership?
get that. I can
Okay,
get that.
that'd be
Yeah.
helpful. Yeah.
So, and it goes through and it highlights, these are the changes,
Yep.
and the different versions.
Yep.
And then this is basically their policies. The only issue with Shipment that we found is that their policies aren't numbered. So here is a kind of their framework.
That's easy enough for us to fix. That's frankly, I think that's a function of Microsoft Word, where
Right.
we can create some numbering in there.
Right, and this was kind of the process of when we looked at a policy, we said, this is a policy we're adopting, this is a policy we're repealing, this is a policy that we're maintaining.
Yeah.
And we went through and we identified
Yep.
essentially a system to kind of do that. So
And that
yes.
delta, the sort of delta analysis, I will, in the CABE column, there's because so many of the existing policies across each of the 3 boards were rooted in CABE. It is easier to do the delta there, and because it's going to have a sort of common structure, generally speaking. But I am even open to starting over at the 1000 and sort of reviewing and sort of doing the same process, especially if what we found, one of the sort of deciding factors is cost, and what's the cost of the subscription to make sure that we have the feed for current. Another function is, because when we get the policies from CABE, it's the policies and the regulations, and it's a lot of pages. If we just had the policies from CABE, how many pages is that versus how many pages is the Shipman content? I think that would be interesting, because if the Shipman content is already concise and we do our basic math of 60 pages a week, that helps us to understand, which path gets us to grandma's house first.
Yeah. I want to respect the work that you've done, and you've had a very thoughtful process. You have a plan moving forward. You can continue on your pathway. I'm just showing you an alternative. And that's just something you have to talk about.
I think it's definitely worth evaluating, because if there's, we did not consider, we didn't look carefully at the sort of shipment as an option there.
Right.
So if it's possible to get the costs, and then perhaps next week, which is the day after Thanksgiving, the week after next week, like,
Right.
yes, no, then we can dive in a little bit more. Maureen, do you know from the Region 9 side if they're paying attention to committee assignments? And
I do not think that they are paying attention
Okay.
at the present time.
I mean,
I have some idea of how things will float around, but
okay.
I do not, nothing is set.
I think
Assuming
December becomes a little bit of no man's land for everybody.
Right, January is looking like your time frame for you having a new committee member to replace me.
Okay. I think that's fair, and frankly, could use the time to do a little organizational work, and would love to, if you have spreadsheets and tables and other project management paraphernalia, I'd love to.
Not for nothing, I'm wondering if, even if we get into December, if it makes sense to hold a meeting, maybe at central office and in person around the table when Gwen is available, to really hash out how is it we want to do this, where are we, and I think that'll help Jason understand a little bit better how we got to where we are, so that we can make a collaborative and informed decision as to how to move.
Right. Yeah, if there's a strong preference, we look at the pricing and it's basically the same or better, or just nominally more expensive. Like if we look at the pricing, we look at we're getting frequent updates. It's not just like once a year kind of thing. If we look at all those dimensions, and then we just play out the timeline, and we say 60 pages a week, starting from scratch, with fewer pages maybe, versus 60 pages a week continuing from the 4000 series on. And we can, I think that.
And I think we can't lose sight of there are additional open issues that exist with respect to the policies that we've looked at so far. Because we have identified a number of areas where practice and policies seem to have been divergent.
Right.
And we need some sort of administration discussion about how we're going to handle that.
Right.
Jason, we took a detour through things like school lunches and shame meals, and through how we handle internet monitoring, particularly when students are off campus. And we had some concerns about how that was being handled. And there's a whole list of things, including how we keep an inventory of equipment. There's a policy that requires an inventory and scan barcodes and things. And we said, timeout, does this exist?
Right.
And the answer was, we don't know. And so there's work like that no matter what policies we're going through, is a mountain of additional clarification before we're going to be comfortable saying to the boards, let's approve this policy that on day one we're going to be out of compliance with, because we want to make sure that we understand what the obligations are all around, no matter what base we're using.
Right.
And so that's where I think maybe a tabletop conversation might be helpful.
That'd be great.
Conversation.
That'd be great.
All right. Well, then I would say that we've got a sort of plan of attack for next steps. Maureen, any or anyone else, any parting thoughts on the subject of where I think 2022 is the year. We're gonna get there. I believe in it. We're gonna get there. We're gonna finalize these policies. I think that maybe we can name the policy book the Maureen Williams policy book and associated.
No tributes are probably allowed. There's probably a policy about that.
Well, I think that when the policy on naming a tri-board parliamentarian comes up, I don't think it needs to be a board member. So.
Okay.
That's very good. I like that a lot.
I can volunteer to be a parliamentarian.
Yes.
All I would say is that this has been a really instructive educational task for me from the receptive side. And I've really enjoyed the conversations and the process. And part of the reason why I think I'm attached to the idea of process continuing in this vein is because it's been so enjoyable. Stepping back from that, I can recognize that it might be efficient to do it another way. But, if you bring in other folks to do this the way that we have been, you really will teach them an inordinate amount along the way.
Right.
I would even suggest you have more than the three of us or
I
the four of
completely
us,
agree.
including Gwen.
Yep.
And you sort of expand this committee along the lines that Dr. McKinnon suggested at our Region 9 meeting, when he was suggesting simplifying committees overall.
Yeah.
Because, then when things come back to the board, it's not just one person standing there and saying, yeah, we did the work. It's
Right.
several.
Right.
And it's also several people forcing themselves to process what governance means, what management means, what all these policies down to the discrete levels mean. So those would be my parting view. I've enjoyed the ride, guys.
Thank you. I wholeheartedly agree with all of those sentiments, and that's very helpful.
I don't think we would have been as productive if we also didn't get along and not take any of this sort of harshly or personally. We've disagreed, we've collaborated, we've reconciled, and we've moved on, and it's been for the benefit of everybody.
Maureen, you were, in the short time that I've known you, you were a strong advocate of efficient subcommittees informing the full board.
Absolutely.
About what best practice looks like.
Right.
And I heard you refer to that several times, because, if we're more efficient at the subcommittee level and you use your time wisely at the board level, then you can truly focus more on substantive matters, teaching and learning and classroom and student achievement, and how to spend taxpayer money and dollars appropriately to support the programs that are innovative and discarding the programs that don't have a high value. Spending your time there is much more efficient than let's take this paragraph or this sentence and let's reword this sentence, or let's go into detail about whether we should spend $8,000 on a pump or $9,000 on a drop. Right, like all of those
At 11 p.m. on a Tuesday.
can be when people are tired, by the way.
Right.
You get to a certain point after 10 p.m. where decisions are made sometimes just because the meeting wants to end.
Well,
I think
to that end, Dr. McKinnon, there was Dr. McMorrin used to suggest a board retreat, and it never happened. Maybe because there was no funding for it, whatever. I really do think it would help, because if you get people to have baseline trust in one another, this committee did, you will find that things will become more efficient de facto.
I think he's got a brochure for us.
Yeah,
He's got a brochure. Yay.
The board committees do on the operational level.
Yeah.
And then the more that the board chairs craft agendas that rely heavily on consent agendas, to say, okay, the facilities committee decided and recommended we're buying the $9,000 pump, not the $10,000 pump. And then the consent calendar shows up with a motion to approve a $9,000 pump. The presumption is not we're going to discuss the $9,000 pump. The presumption has become we're going to trust that the committee has recommended it, we're going to move forward. And it takes the affirmative step of somebody to say, I want to remove this from the consent agenda so we can talk about it. And then they need to establish a majority of people who want to talk about it before they have the right to even talk about it. And I think that additional hurdle can remove a lot of the circular discussion.
It would be nice to do something like a board retreat. And I just got this book in. I want to show it to you, Stephanie. It's called The Governance Code. School boards, superintendents, and schools working together. And it comes with a workbook where you can go through and kind of look at various activities, almost like tabletop exercises, where you're actually working towards working on a particular standard or a principle, and it would be nice to do that along with someone from Shipman, for example, who can provide a high level. These are your core responsibilities and oversight, and this is how it works. And then we delve in and we have conversations using, we could do a book study and so on. It'll be.
I love that. I mean, I'm a huge fan of let's, do some book clubs. Let's get to, get our brains thinking.
Frozen.
Oh, yeah. Am I with you?
You are.
Okay, huge fan of the sort of book clubs, and let's all read something together and let's talk about it idea, because I think that's going to really catapult us forward. I did think that what you said was the governance code, not the governance core, and I was thinking that sounds like the worst Dan Brown book I could imagine.
It was the governance core.
Core. I thought you said code, so I don't know. I had already bought it on Amazon, and now we'll see. All right. Any additional items on this agenda?
Just
Friday
I think that we
mornings will
should.
not be the same without Maureen.
Agreed.
Oh, I'll tune in some Fridays. I'll
Okay.
check the public calendar and I'll come just to say hi. I promise.
I think we should not lose the thread and deliberately perhaps start circulating emails to find a common time to have an in-person meeting in the month of December, just to make sure we're on the same page.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that'd be
agreed.
great.
Agreed.
Because those dates fill very quickly.
Very good. All right. So that'll move us out of discussion and possible action into committee member comment. Hearing none, I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Was that a second, Chris? Thank you. Absent objection, we are adjourned at 9:57 a.m.
Bye,
Thank you
guys.
very much, everybody. Have a good morning. Thanks.